Have you ever found yourself out on a walk? Maybe it's just, a perfect afternoon, and you spot this incredibly stunning, tiny detail in nature.
Oh, like a dewdrop or something.
Exactly. A dewdrop balancing on a blade of grass, or maybe this really fascinating little insect with, iridescent wings.
Right, something that just catches your eye.
Yeah. And you pull out your state-of-the-art modern smartphone, the one that, let's be honest, practically required taking out a mortgage to buy.
Yeah, the $1,000 supercomputer in your pocket.
Right. And you bring it right up close to capture the magic. You hover your hand, like just an inch away. You tap the screen to lock onto that tiny detail, and the camera violently refuses to focus.
Oh, it's the worst. It just turns into this pulsing, frustrating blur.
Yes. And the motor inside the phone is like audibly clicking back and forth. And by the time you pull the device away to figure out what's broken, the insect is it's gone.
Poof, opportunity completely missed.
And you are left staring at this smeared green smudge on your screen, wondering how a $1,000 piece of technology was just completely defeated by a dandelion.
It's just one of those wildly frustrating modern problems, We are walking around with computational power that, it rivals desktop workstations from 5 years ago.
Oh, easily.
It's packing sophisticated artificial intelligence, yet the simple act of photographing a small object at close range routinely causes the entire system to just fail.
Which naturally makes you feel like, user error is to blame. You assume you must be holding it wrong.
Right, or that you haven't enabled some secret hidden setting in the camera menu.
Exactly. But the problem isn't you. The problem is the actual physical hardware in your pocket.
Yeah, it really is.
So for this deep dive, we are pulling from a highly specific and honestly fascinating source. It's an entry from a meticulously maintained personal blog called kianmeng.org.
Yeah, the author goes by Ang, right?
Yep, Eng. And he describes himself as an old software plumber. He spends his nights tinkering with free, Libre, and open-source software and just obsessively documenting the technical realities of his hobbies.
It's such a great source. The specific entry we are examining is titled Notes on Photography, Part 232, and it's subtitled The Issue with Telemacro Lens in Mobile Phone.
Part 232, I love that.
I know, right? And Ang brings this really grounded mechanical perspective to a limitation that smartphone manufacturers actively try to obscure with, flashy marketing language. He strips all the hype away and looks entirely at the optical mechanics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to figure out the hidden technical catch in modern mobile photography, specifically focusing on this piece of hardware known as the telemacro lens.
Right.
We need to discover what actually makes a good camera phone for close-ups and examine the physical realities that dictate why our devices fail at the very things they are advertised to do flawlessly.
Well, to understand the failure point of your phone's camera during a close-up, we first have to look at the dual-purpose nature of the lenses that are currently dominating the market.
The telemacro ones.
Exactly. Manufacturers are increasingly installing these telemacro lenses, expecting basically one piece of glass to perform two completely contradictory jobs.
Yeah, because the name itself, telemacro, it's a total oxymoron.
It really is.
Tele implies telephoto,
Yeah.
which is engineered for shooting subjects at a vast distance, like a mountain. But macro means shooting microscopic details at an incredibly close range.
Right. It's basically trying to combine them. It sounds like forcing a single tool to be both a sledgehammer and a scalpel at the same time.
That is a perfect way to put it.
What's fascinating here is the underlying physics of that contradiction, because, a camera lens is not a digital sensor. It is physical glass designed to bend light rays.
Right, it's literal physical hardware.
Exactly. To resolve a sharp image on the digital sensor that's sitting behind the lens, light requires a specific physical distance to travel and converge.
Okay, makes sense.
So the curvature of a telephoto lens is optimized to take parallel light rays arriving from, say, that distant mountain you mentioned, and bend them gently to a focal point.
But if you use that for a bug...
Right. When you take that exact same curvature and bring it 2 centimeters away from a dewdrop, the light rays coming off that dewdrop are highly divergent. They're spreading out aggressively.
Oh, I see.
So the glass physically cannot bend those steeply angled light rays sharply enough to converge on the sensor.
Wow. So it's a hard boundary. Like Ang points out in his notes that this physical limitation locks the minimum focus distance of these telemacro lenses somewhere between, I think, 3 centimeters and 10 centimeters.
Yeah, that's the dead zone.
There's an invisible, impenetrable barrier around your device.
Yeah.
You literally cannot get physically closer to your subject than that line.
Correct. The hardware enforces a strict geometric limit. It's just physics. When you cross that 3 centimeter threshold, the light rays cross behind the sensor or they just fail to converge at all.
And that's what causes the blur.
Exactly. A mathematical optical blur.
Let me put this in a different perspective just to see if the mechanism translates. It's like trying to wear a pair of, extreme bifocals and trying to read a book by pressing it directly against your nose.
Oh, yeah, that wouldn't work at all.
Right. You can't just mash the text into your face and expect the optics to resolve the tiny text. The lenses are shaped for a different distance. The lens is trying to serve two different optical masters, and it just fails completely at the extreme close-up.
That analogy holds up perfectly regarding the curvature of the glass. And Ang brings this theoretical physics problem into a highly relatable, really practical scenario. He discusses the absolute nightmare of trying to shoot a photograph of plants swaying in the wind.
Oh my gosh, this swaying plant scenario is infuriating.
Isn't it?
You try to hold your hand perfectly still, but the wind keeps pushing the leaf slightly closer, then slightly further away. So it's repeatedly crossing that invisible 3-centimeter boundary.
And this forces us to look at how autofocus actually functions under the hood. Most phones, in a macro scenario, they rely heavily on contrast detect autofocus.
What does that mean exactly?
So the camera's processor analyzes the live feed from the sensor, looking for adjacent pixels with high contrast, like a dark edge against a light background.
Okay, because contrast means it's sharp.
Precisely. That indicates sharpness to the computer. But when the leaf sways into that 3-centimeter dead zone, the divergent light rays wash out all the contrast. The image just turns to mush.
And the camera just panics.
It completely panics. It systematically hunts. The autofocus motor physically drives the lens barrel back and forth, desperately trying to find that contrast edge.
Oh, so that clicking sound I hear.
That's the motor. But because the object is inside the minimum focal distance, the lens hits its physical mechanical stop before achieving sharpness. Then it reverses and tries again.
That is the pulsing blur you see on your screen.
Exactly. The hardware is trapped in a loop, searching for optical data that the glass is physically incapable of providing.
Okay, but I have to challenge this premise, though, especially considering the current landscape of technology.
Okay, hit me.
We see these massive tech giants spending billions of dollars on computational photography and artificial intelligence, right? These new processors perform trillions of operations per second.
They do, yeah.
So are you telling me that with all this advanced machine learning, the phone cannot simply digitally reconstruct the focal layer? Like, we have software that can instantly map a face in 3D or artificially blur the background of a portrait. Why can't the software just overrule a 3-centimeter physical gap and sharpen the leaf?
It's a fair question, but it's because software cannot synthesize data that was never captured in the first place.
But what about portrait mode?
Well, to use your portrait mode example, the camera is still capturing a perfectly sharp optical image of the subject's face, right? It's merely applying a computational blur to the background pixels.
Ah, I see.
But when you push past a lens's minimum focal distance, the subject itself is lost. The light rays never converge. The raw image data hitting the sensor is just a uniform, washed-out smear.
So the AI essentially has nothing to work with.
Precisely. Artificial intelligence can, hallucinate or guess what a generic leaf might look like based on its training data. But if you were trying to capture a photograph of that specific leaf's unique cellular structure...
Or the exact compound eye of that specific insect.
Right. The optical data must exist. Algorithms cannot reach outside the phone and bend physical light rays before they enter the glass. Physics always wins.
Man, that's wild. But wait, if the physics of glass are immutable, and these telemacro lenses are mechanically doomed to fail at extreme close-ups, then manufacturers are knowingly putting compromised hardware into our devices.
They absolutely are.
But why? Why force this dual-purpose telemacro lens onto the consumer? Or worse, replace dedicated macro hardware with this totally inferior approach?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is entirely driven by the economics of the smartphone market. And honestly, the psychology of the modern consumer.
How so?
Well, Ang's notes shed some harsh light on the cheap tricks currently saturating the industry. Manufacturers are terrified of producing a phone that looks visually inferior to a competitor's model, so they rely on quantity over optical quality.
Oh, wow. Ang points out that the market is flooded with two specific poor substitutes for true macro photography, right?
Yes.
The first one is brands completely abandoning macro hardware and relying entirely on software-driven digital zoom, which is just awful.
Digital zoom is perhaps the most deceptive term in mobile photography today.
It really is.
You are not zooming. You are not changing the optical focal length or getting physically closer to the subject.
You're just cropping.
Exactly. The camera is simply taking a standard wide photograph, cropping into the center of the image, and then blowing those center pixels up to fit your screen.
It's like taking a tiny photograph printed on a balloon and inflating it. The image gets larger, sure, but the ink stretches, distorts, and loses all its sharpness. You just end up with a massive pixelated mess.
And that pixelation destroys the fine detail required for macro photography. You need that detail. Now, Eng's second poor substitute is the inclusion of what he calls cheap 2MP or 2-megapixel filler lenses.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I want to look at those 2MP lenses. I initially assumed they serve some sort of hidden technical purpose.
Most people do.
Have you noticed how the back of smartphones today look like a cluster of spider eyes?
Oh yeah, just covered in circles.
There are 3, 4, sometimes 5 different circular lenses back there. My assumption was always that these extra tiny lenses were acting as depth sensors, or perhaps gathering ambient light to composite a better main image. Are manufacturers genuinely just slapping useless 2-megapixel cameras on the back of a phone purely for the visual aesthetic?
In many cases involving these specific 2MP macro cameras, yes. It is almost entirely aesthetic and marketing driven.
That is wild.
To understand why, we have to talk about pixel pitch and sensor size. A 2-megapixel sensor is physically minuscule. The individual pixels, the microscopic buckets that actually catch the light photons, are incredibly small.
And macro photography inherently struggles with light, right? Because when you hold your phone 3 centimeters away from a bug, the physical shadow of the phone literally blocks the sun.
That is the crucial intersection of the problem. You are blocking the ambient light with the phone itself, and you are forcing a tiny 2-megapixel sensor with microscopic photon buckets to capture an image in the dark.
So it just fails.
The sensor cannot gather enough light data, so the processor artificially boosts the signal. And doing that introduces massive amounts of digital noise.
Right, that grainy look.
The result is a grainy, washed-out, low-resolution photograph that barely looks acceptable on a 6-inch phone screen, let alone if you wanted to print it or edit it.
So it exists purely for the spec sheet.
Yeah.
A buyer walks into a store, compares 2 phones at the exact same price point, sees one with 3 cameras and one with 4 cameras.
And they think more is better.
Exactly. The quad-camera device sounds inherently superior, even if that 4th camera is a 2MP sensor that costs pennies to manufacture and produces completely unusable photos. It's just a megapixel mirage.
A mirage designed to obscure the fact that true optical quality is expensive to manufacture.
Right.
Eng cuts through this marketing noise to provide a definitive solution, though. He notes that if you want genuine close-up capabilities, you must look for a phone equipped with a proper, dedicated 5-megapixel macro lens.
The 5-megapixel is the key.
He considers this the true gold standard, noting it is miles better than the standard filler or that telemacro compromise we talked about.
But wait, why specifically 5 megapixels? Like, if we're chasing specs, why not demand a 50-megapixel macro lens?
It really comes down to the physical constraints of smartphone design. A 5-megapixel sensor hits the sweet spot for a dedicated macro camera.
Oh.
It provides a significant leap in resolution and pixel size over those cheap 2MP throwaways, allowing for much better light gathering and detail retention. However, it remains small enough that the necessary glass elements don't require a massive protruding lens housing on the back of the phone.
Ah, so you don't have a giant camera bump just for the macro.
Exactly. It is a dedicated piece of hardware engineered with a single focal purpose-resolving close-up details without the burden of trying to also shoot distant landscapes.
Okay, let's establish our ideal scenario based on this data. You navigate the deceptive marketing, you ignore the cheap 2MP fillers, you bypass the telemacro traps, and you successfully identify a device that features a dedicated 5MP macro lens.
Okay, you've found the unicorn.
Right. You fully charge the battery, step outside into a beautiful garden, and prepare for a long afternoon of macro photography. Based on the optics, you are perfectly equipped. But according to Eng, you are still going to encounter a massive problem.
Because up until this point, we've only analyzed the internal hardware and the software processing. We have completely ignored the external physical reality of the device itself.
The physical body of the modern smartphone.
Right. Eng drops a highly practical yet rarely discussed observation in his notes. Modern phones have absolutely terrible ergonomics for photography.
They really do. When you think about it, we buy these things based on battery life, screen resolution, storage space, but nobody tests the grip for a 3-hour outdoor photography session.
No one. This raises an important question about the evolution of industrial design. Tech reviewers analyze processor benchmarks, they test screen brightness nits, and they measure battery depletion rates.
Sure.
But almost no one evaluates the physical biomechanics of holding a smartphone completely still for a prolonged period.
It's kind of like buying a high-performance sports car purely for its top speed, only to realize the driver's seat feels like a wooden bench.
That's exactly what it is.
It's funny how we've just universally accepted that our primary communication and creative devices are supposed to be these slippery, heavy glass rectangles.
Yeah, we buy cases not just for protection, but simply to make the devices holdable.
Right. When you buy a traditional camera, you evaluate the grip. A DSLR camera has a deep, molded right-hand grip designed to center the mass of the camera over your palm.
Which allows your hand to relax while supporting the weight.
Exactly. But smartphones lack that entirely.
Their design philosophy prioritizes sleek, monolithic aesthetics. They are engineered to look futuristic while resting flat on a conference room table or, slipping easily into a tight pocket.
Which is completely counterproductive when you are hovering the device over a flower. Ang points out that modern phones are surprisingly heavy. When you lack a dedicated grip, you are forced to pinch the edges of the heavy glass rectangle between your thumb and fingers.
And that pinching mechanism requires engaging small stabilizing muscles in your hand and forearm.
Which get tired fast.
Very fast. If you are hovering a 200-gram slab of glass a few centimeters above a subject, trying to maintain perfect focal distance against a swaying plant, those stabilizing muscles quickly fatigue.
And muscle fatigue introduces microtremors into your hand.
Exactly. While optical image stabilization can compensate for slight handshakes in a standard landscape photo, macro photography magnifies everything.
Oh, right, because you're so close.
A millimeter of tremor in your hand translates to a massive blurry shift in the frame when the subject is only centimeters away from the lens.
That makes total sense.
Ang rightly elevates the physical weight and the lack of an ergonomic grip to be just as significant a limiting factor as the megapixel count. If you cannot comfortably hold the tool steady, the quality of the optical glass becomes irrelevant.
The practicality of that advice is what really grounds this entire deep dive. It forces you to rethink the tool as a physical object, not just a spec sheet. To fully appreciate this level of pragmatic analysis, we need to look closer at the source itself, kianmeng.org, and the author Ang. It is vital to understand who is providing this information because it completely recontextualizes the value of the advice.
It is a stark contrast to the standard tech media landscape, that's for sure.
Yeah.
This insight is not coming from a glossy, corporate-sponsored review site that relies on affiliate links or, early access hardware provided by the manufacturers.
Ang's platform is a deeply personal, remarkably meticulous database of pure human curiosity. The sheer scale of his archiving is just humbling.
It really is.
The post we are dissecting today is Notes on Photography, Part 232. But that is just a fraction of his output, like he has notes on gardening up to Part 833.
The scope of his documentation covers an incredibly diverse array of highly technical and deeply personal interests. He maintains extensive notes on programming languages like Haskell and Elixir.
He documents fish keeping too, right?
Oh yeah, including rigorous logs of betta fish spawning. He tracks his dieting protocols, his home improvement projects, and his deep dedication to free, libre, and open source software.
He has been logging this information continuously since 2011.
Wow.
In a single recent year, he published over 700 posts. That requires writing, organizing, and publishing multiple times a day, every single day, just to track his learning and tinkering.
That is dedication.
So I want to ask you listening, what stands out to you about a person who dedicates that much time to thoroughly documenting the minutiae of their hobbies for over a decade, entirely in public?
For me, it represents the foundational ethos of the early internet.
Oh, absolutely.
It is a digital archive built purely for the sake of knowledge preservation and community sharing. It is a labor of intense passion, completely untainted by the modern pressures of viral engagement algorithms or corporate monetization.
Yeah, he explicitly states on his site that his opinions are his own, independent of any employer, and exist solely for informational purposes.
He also uses his platform to advocate for a user-empowered digital world. He explicitly urges his readers to support organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Tor Project, and Wikipedia.
Organizations that believe in systems that are open, accessible, and transparent.
Which perfectly explains his ability to cut through the marketing noise surrounding smartphone cameras. You have an engineer, a software plumber, who understands how complex systems are built, Examining a piece of closed-system consumer hardware,
He sees right through it.
he recognizes the telemacro lens for what it is, a physical compromise masked by software tricks. He isn't financially incentivized to praise a phone's new AI features. He simply diagnoses the mechanical and optical reality of the device in his hand.
So what does this all mean? Let's distill Ang's extensive notes down to the core, actionable takeaways for the next time you find yourself in the market for a new device.
Good idea.
If capturing the tiny, intricate details of the world is important to you, you have to completely change the metrics you use to shop.
The primary takeaway is to ignore the megapixel mirage and the sheer quantity of lenses plastered on the back of the device.
Step 1. Do not assume more cameras equals a better camera system. Specifically, hunt the spec sheet for a dedicated 5-megapixel macro lens, accept nothing less, and avoid the 2MP filler traps.
Right. And step 2. Dig into the technical specifications and check the minimum focus distance of the primary camera system.
That's crucial.
If you see it falls into that 3 to 10 centimeter dead zone, recognize that you are dealing with a telemacro lens that will physically prevent extreme close-ups.
And step 3 involves the physical reality of the hardware. Go to a store and actually hold the device.
Yes, feel the weight of the glass.
Pinch it as if you were hovering it over a flower. Pay attention to the ergonomics and ask yourself if the lack of a molded grip is going to cause your hand to cramp and introduce micro-tremors after 5 minutes of shooting. Do not just buy an aesthetic monolith.
Buy a tool that functionally serves your needs.
Exactly.
It is about aligning the physical capabilities of the hardware with your actual artistic intent, rather than trusting that an artificial intelligence algorithm will magically fix broken optical physics.
Exactly. And beyond the hard technical advice regarding optics and ergonomics, there is a profound inspiration to be found in Ang's sheer dedication to documentation.
There really is.
Think about the discipline required to sequentially number your daily observations year after year until you reach part 232 of your photography notes.
It's incredible.
Which leads me to our final provocative thought for today. If you were to start your own meticulously numbered Notes On series today, logging your own life, your own hyper-specific passions, or your daily observations, what obscure topic would be your part 1?
That is a wonderful concept to explore, just finding the value in logging the small details of our own lives.
It really is. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. The next time you spot a dewdrop on a blade of grass and your camera begins violently pulsing in and out, searching for contrast and a blur of divergent light rays, well, at least you'll know the physics behind exactly why it is happening. Keep exploring.